Daddy eats lost. Daddy eats lost. Daddy eats lost. Munch, munch, munch.
Hello and welcome to Daddy Eats Last, where we discuss the challenges of being a man in modern society and what the hell that even means. I'm Kane, and with Ryan in Cambridge and Maddie missing in action, he's watching the NRL Grand Final. It's just me, and tonight I am going to talk about disappointment because often our expectations don't align with real life. The result, that's disappointment. Remember when you were a kid and you lined up for an hour to go on a ride at a theme park, or when you lined up to meet someone you looked up to, or even when you're an adult, that restaurant you really wanted to eat at, or the movie you heard great things about? It's likely that you'll have felt some level of disappointment with the end result, as the experience that you had built up in your head was so much better than what actually happened in real life. Now, disappointment is a normal part of life, and everyone will experience it in some extent or to some extent in their life. 2020 is a great example. In 2020, we cancelled too many things. Too many birthday celebrations were virtual or on Zoom, or maybe a drive-by if you're really lucky. Too many holidays and other occasions were quiet or, again, done on Zoom. Really, in 2020, it was a year marked by all of life's disappointment because of a pandemic. Fair enough, it was actually a pandemic, but was also filled with disappointment. And 2021 hasn't been much better. Hell, the 4th of August this year was a huge disappointment if you lived in Victoria, because in Victoria, we actually went from having 0 new COVID cases and expecting to get back towards COVID normal to instead barely 24 hours later being back in lockdown. It's now 60 odd days later. And in the last week, we've averaged over 1,000 new cases a day, almost hitting 1,500 a day. And our only real way out is vaccination. Now, talk about a disappointing state of affairs, going from 0 cases to lockdown within 24 hours. It's an absolute roller coaster. Personally, I'd actually also sold a business not long before this, and was actually kind of really looking forward to a little bit of freedom and free time that this would have actually meant. And yes, I've had plenty of free time rattling around my 5K radius, my 10K radius, and now my 15K radius for my allotted time, but it's not really the same. And it's not fun to be disappointed, but equally, you should not let disappointment linger. While it's absolutely okay to take some time in your disappointment to sit in disappointment, try not to focus on your negative emotions for too long. Spending too much time and energy on your disappointment will have a detrimental impact on your mood and overall mental health. You only need to ask yourself, will this matter 1 year from now, 1 week, 1 month? A lot of time asking this question will bring you back to reality, because far too many people, when faced with disappointment, tend to attribute negative life events to their personal feelings. They resort to self-blaming as they feel ashamed or humiliated or upset with themselves for not measuring up to the image of themselves they had in their own head. As a result, they direct their anger inwards onto themselves. It may prompt them to say they deserved it, that they were not good enough or something like that. Then it can fester and grow into something more than it needs to be. Other people will direct their anger towards other people, outwards, to people who didn't fulfill their expectations, and it will contribute to feelings of spite and bitterness. Unfortunately, both these emotional reactions keep the person who's experiencing them stuck in a spiral of disappointment, and often this disappointment can turn into a lingering sadness, a feeling of loss, or being let down, depending on where you're pointing that emotion. So really, what are the alternatives if you're disappointed with something or in someone, or because something has happened? You can actually view disappointment as something you can learn from. You can consider whether there is something you could do differently next time. Sometimes there's not, but it's well worth thinking about that. When we catch ourselves thinking negatively, we should redirect our energy and focus onto positive solutions and positive thoughts. You may need to do a bit of positive self-talk, or some meditation, or some mindfulness, or some journaling. You may need to kick the negative people around you to the curb for a while and just surround yourself with positive people who make you feel good. A big one for me is to look after my physical health. Whenever I've had something stressful happen or a big disappointment, I've always tried to prioritize my physical health as it has a big positive effect on my own mental well-being. And we've discussed this before in previous Daddy Eats Last episodes with Maddie and Ryan about how we exercise and the different exercises we do. And a lot of that is, again, around mental well-being, not so much the physical side of things. Now, I generally do some level of exercise every day, literally 7 days a week. Not because I'm some vain bastard. You should see my hair or my facial hair or the clothing that I wear, but because it honestly just makes me feel a hell of a lot better. It's a way I cope with life and the inevitable stress and disappointment and rejection and all those negative emotions, all those things which I feel every day. Exercise is a way that it helps me to cope. It's much healthier than the red wine and dim sim method I probably used 10 years ago, and we'll go into that in another episode of Daddy Eats Last. But my point is that experiencing disappointment is often outside of your control, but the way you deal with it is not. You need to find your way of dealing with disappointment and the general negative emotions of everyday life. And if you can learn a way to deal with disappointment and negative emotions and emerge from it, you build resilience in its wake, and resilience is one of the most important skills you can have. That wraps it up for this week. Remember to subscribe to Daddy Eats Last on iTunes if you haven't done already, and while you're there, please leave a review. Also, tell your mates about the podcast, especially if they are guys. Most of all, thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with another episode, or should I say serving, of Daddy Eats Last. How's that for a dad joke? Catch you next week.
Bye bye. Bye bye.